We'll be referring this evening to 1 Samuel 21, but want to focus mainly on Psalm 34, which is David's reflection on that period or that event in his life. And I want to really pick out one verse in particular. It's verse 5, Psalm 34 and verse 5. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. Have you ever had a time in your life when you felt afraid to show your face? Maybe, I certainly remember it in school, doing something, a mistake or something like that, and just everyone laughing, and a bit of maybe mocking, maybe even bullying as a result, and just feeling so embarrassed and ashamed. I just didn't want my face to be seen in public again. And that's an experience that isn't just limited to us when we're children. There are many events and experiences in life that can make us feel shame. It might be something like a divorce, or perhaps a particularly public sin, or maybe being abused. That can make someone feel ashamed. Or maybe betrayal, especially if it's known about. Maybe false accusations, slander. That can make us feel, I don't want anyone to see me ever again. Maybe bankruptcy. Maybe an addiction that people get to know about. We've all had them. We all have them. We will all have them. Shame is part of our fallen human experience. And is it really important to distinguish from guilt? Sometimes we confuse the two. Guilt is when we violate God's law. We would say, I've done something wrong. It's about what we have done or not done, which becomes a sin. And our question there is, how can God forgive me? That's guilt. Shame is not so much about what I've done, but who I am. Somebody might come to a pastor and say, I've done something terrible, I need forgiveness. But another person might come and say, I've been through a terrible experience, or something terrible has happened, and I can't lift my head up. I just don't want to face people anymore. People regard me as nothing, or worse than nothing. I'm just so embarrassed, humiliated. I can't lift my head. So guilt is wrestling with violating God's law. What have I done? And shame is really about who am I? It's a feeling of being disgraced, of being unworthy, or something like that. And the wonderful news of the gospel is that Jesus deals with both guilt and shame. We focus on the guilt, but there's also the shame. And of course, it often comes together. It can do if our shame is a result of our own, that shame upon ourselves. We do something, or we're found out for something, and it is just so humiliating. But we can also feel shame when we've been sinned against. It may be a woman who's been sexually assaulted, although it was nothing to do with her fault, yet she can feel a degree of shame about that. Or an unplanned pregnancy, say, that came about through an attack. None of these are the woman's fault, and yet she can feel shame. Perhaps it's just something simple like public embarrassment. Not sin so much, just a mistake. And this resulting wanting to cower away. Or false accusation, when you know lots of people are saying evil, false things about you, it's much easier to hide than to go into the public, even when there's no truth to the accusations. So shame comes as a result of us sinning, of us being sinned against, of public mistakes, and also being falsely accused. So shame involves us losing a sense of worth, of honor, of place, maybe of reputation. And it makes us hide our faces. We end up saying something like this: I feel so ashamed. I feel so ashamed. But these passages reveal God to us as the shame-removing King. We've seen him in many ways in our study of David, but tonight we'll see him as the shame-removing King, because Psalm 34 is about a man who wanted to hide his face. And no wonder, as we'll see. But instead, he learned to live before God's face without any shame. So, how do you deal with shame? We want to see how David dealt with it, but how do you deal with it? Maybe we can learn from David, because we see the first thing he did was he learned from his bad days. And 1 Samuel 21 was truly one of David's bad days. We saw the last time one of his bad days when he, out of sinful fear, told lies to the priest in order to get food, and ultimately that resulted in actually many priests being killed. But he went on and sinned again in the passage we read, because from the priest he fled to Gath, the land of the Philistines, the capital of the Philistines. He goes to a really bad place. It really couldn't be worse than to go to the center of the maximum hostility against God and his people and his covenant. He's in a really bad place, and he has a really bad fear. You'll see it says he rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath, and the servants of Achish said to him, "Is not this the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. They discovered who he was. And no wonder, because he was actually carrying Goliath's sword rather foolishly. And so they remember David as their nemesis. David, we read in verse 12, took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. He's terrified. He's been recognized in the citadel of his greatest enemies, many of whose relatives he probably was involved in slaying in a just war. And now, here he is, surrounded. A bad place, a bad fear, the fear of man, which leads him to a bad salvation. He delivers himself. He looks to his own devices, his own strategies, his own thinking, and conjures up an utter deception, a humiliating, a shameful deception. Because we read, when he took these words to heart and was much afraid, he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands, and made marks on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle run down his beard. Instead of trusting God, instead of fearing God, instead of walking the pathway of truth, he had lied when he was with the priest, and now he's lying when he's with Achish in a different way, in a way that leaves him in a terrible state. We try and picture it, but it must have been even worse than that. This man of God, this anointed of God, this man that had taken on Goliath, who knew God's deliverances, and yet here he is, acting insane, acting in a way that led to his degradation. He's spitting out saliva that's sticking to his beard. He's scratching at the doors. He's doing anything that will make them think, this is a madman. And they did. That's exactly what they said. We read, Achish said to his servants, behold, you see, the man is mad. Why have you brought him to me? This guy's no threat. He's no danger. Do I lack madmen that you've brought another? Shall this fellow come into my house? He just throws him out. I don't want anything to do with this maniac, this lunatic, this madman. And this must have resulted in an experience of terrible shame for David, given that we have Psalm 34, which shows us something completely different, and in which he talks in a few places about how God delivers from shame and from enemies. But reflecting on this, as we reflect on our own shame, we say, how could I have been so foolish? What have I become? Drooling into my beard, scratching at the walls, saying who knows what, screaming like a banshee. I was Israel's champion, and now I'm a drooling madman. And shame does that. It turns us inward. It turns all our thinking upon ourselves as we critique and condemn ourselves and leave us just in pieces. And shame is trying to tell us, you are defined by your worst moment. But the gospel has an answer to that. David did learn from his bad days. This was probably the lowest moment in David's life until this point. He made sure, obviously, that it was told to the writer of 1 Samuel. And then he reflects on it in Psalm 34, having learned many lessons. We can learn from our bad days. Not all humiliations are bad. God can use them, and he used them in David's life. Because we see, secondly, we deal with shame by looking for good days. By stopping looking only at the past and the bad places and the bad fears and the bad strategies that we have used and the awful shame that we end up in. No, in Psalm 34, David turns and pictures a completely different scene that is so redemptive. He's in a much better place. Time and again, as you can see if you read this passage, he's very conscious of the presence of God, not the presence of his enemies. He's anxious to be in and to feel God's nearness. He's looking to God now, not himself. You look at how he begins this psalm. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. All these bad fears are gone, and in its place is a good fear, the fear of the Lord. And in place of that bad, self-made, man-made salvation, deliverance that David conjured up, there's this. I sought the Lord, he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. I believe this is David looking back at that time and seeing that although he tried to deliver himself using foolish and sinful means, he sees ultimately, behind it all, that God delivered him. Not that God approved of his acts, but ultimately, any time we get out of any awful situations, it's the Lord who delivers from our fears. He rescues us from shame. He reshapes us through shame. And he helps us learn from shame. You can see that throughout this psalm. And so what changed was not the event, but what changed was David's God-given interpretation of that same event. And the verse here, verse 5, really sums it all up. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. This is in hindsight, of course. This is him looking back. And he's saying basically, if I had only looked to him instead of looking to myself, I wouldn't have ended up ashamed and disgraced, but radiant and delivered. So, I want to see a few steps here where David helps us see how to deal with our own shame. And the first step is this: looking away from self and looking to God. That's how this verse begins, isn't it? Those who look to him. Look to yourself. That's the way to shame and dishonor. Look to him. That's the first step. God becomes the central character again. God's no longer way out there, but he's right in the center of David's life. He's not looking to any deception or strategy, but only to the Lord. Looking away from himself, his wisdom, his strength, everything. And saying, Lord, my face is towards you. And you know, we get our worth from the face or faces that we live before. We get our worth, our value, our sense of self from the faces that we live before. David here, all he saw was Philistine faces. That's why he was ashamed. But here he's saying, if I look to him, instead of shame, there will be radiance. He looks away from himself, and he's saying, today and from now on, there's going to be good days. Instead of looking at the faces of people, I'm going to look at the face of God. which will mean I'll not be ashamed and disgraced again, but honored. So shame is an experience that comes about when we live before the wrong audience. Shame is an experience that comes about from living before the wrong audience. And so we need to look away from self, from others, and look to God. And secondly, we will move then from ashamed to radiant, from humiliated to head lifted up and brightness. The radiance that David speaks of here, it didn't come from himself. It came from looking at another radiant face. As he says, those who look to him are radiant. You see, shame lives through borrowed eyes. It's continually asking, how do they see me? What do they think of me? What do they say about me? And therefore we're living our lives through borrowed eyes, instead of, as David had learned here, to live it through the Lord's eyes. And when we do that, when we live before his face, when we live before his eyes, we won't hear the voices that try to shame us and disgrace us, whether it's in the playground, the yard, the community, the office, the church, whatever our roles and relationships are in this world. The big question here for David is, who am I looking to if I want radiance instead of shame? It says, how does my Father in heaven see me? What does my Father in heaven say about me? As we were singing there, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. And so, living before his face, hearing his voice, changes that downcast face to an upturned face. Our faces go from being disgraced to honored, from being ashamed and hiding to being welcomed. When we are humiliated, whether by our own fault or because of others or just life, it's still part of our biography, but it's not part of our identity. And that's what shame tries to do. It tries to take an event, an experience, a moment, a sin, or a sin that was sinned against you, and it says, this is who you are. This is what defines you. This is you summed up in this experience, in this sin, in this experience of being sinned against, in this humiliation. That's all you are. And so again, where do we get radiance? Where do we get our identity? David kept this in his biography, but it never became part of his identity, as we see from Psalm 34. And it doesn't mean that when we do that, we'll be outwardly vindicated. It might be that you have to go through life with that over your head or attached to your name. But inward vindication, inward radiance, inward experience of God's honoring of you. must outweigh all the dishonor that may be heaped upon us in other ways. Then what does David do? Well, as we'll see, he returns to his calling. He doesn't stay in Gath. He returns to Israel to prepare to be a king. In the meantime, he's a shepherd, and he starts living in today. Shame wants us to live in yesterday. But one of the things when we look to the Lord and his radiance comes into our lives, all that he thinks of us, all that he values about us, and he takes away the shame, that frees us to live not in the past, but in the present, in today, and fulfill our callings. The human verdicts are not final verdicts. God's verdict is the final one. And if we can live in the light of his verdict, then how much less would our faces be cast down, and how much more would they be lifted up as we just go about our normal way, regardless of all that's swirling around us. So, let me give you these steps again. Looking to self to looking to God, step 1. Step 2, from humiliation to radiance. Step 3, from faces down to faces up. Step 4, return to today's calling. And step 5, repeat. 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 Because while we win some of these battles, we also lose them. This battle is not won in a one-time event, but in 1,000 little looks, in 1,000 listenings, in 1,000 shinings of God's radiant face upon us. And bit by bit, that sense of shame and disgrace can evaporate. As somebody put it, stay in God's gaze until you see yourself through his eyes. Stay in God's gaze until you see yourself through his eyes. Whatever you say about yourself, whatever the devil says about you, whatever others say about you, to turn you down and turn you aside and turn you away from God. What he says of you, believer, Christian, disciple, is all that matters. So stay there. No one else has been given the authority to define your identity. No event has. No experience has. And yes, it may be our shame is a result of our own sin. And we feel, how can I even look to the Lord? I'm ashamed even to be in his presence. And I feel like I just need to keep going, hiding, running, turning away, looking to me, trying to make myself better. If I could do that, then I wouldn't be so ashamed. Or if I could conjure up repentance and conviction and contrition and tears, then I could maybe go and not be ashamed. David's saying, in the depths of your shame, in the depths of your sin, in the depths of your disgrace, look. And what will you see? You'll see welcome. You'll see gladness. You'll see I've no reason to be ashamed. Because he can take away not just my sin. If I look to him, radiant, shame of that. You know, you remember Peter, once he had denied the Lord 3 times. He was truly ashamed. And we read that he turns, and Jesus turns, and their eyes lock in the gospel. And the result is that Peter goes out and he weeps bitterly. And some people say, oh, Jesus must have really frowned. He must have shown real anger towards Peter. I don't think so. We're told here, those who look to him are radiant. It was the fact that the Lord was still loving. The Lord was still looking on him. The Lord was still accepting him. The Lord was still assuring him by his looks, by his expressions, you're still mine. You're still loved. And it was that, surely, that broke Peter's heart. And it was that ultimately drew him back. So, how do you handle shame? Oftentimes I sum it up, but I just wanted to use a verse in this psalm. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. One of the reasons why we don't look to him is because we don't think he's good. We don't think he's full of mercy and grace and love. We think we're just going to get a spanking. We're just going to get crushed further. And David's experience was not like that, and that's why he says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Yes, you may have brought that shame upon yourself. You may feel just you've not spoken to the Lord for a long time. You can hardly open his word because you almost can see his face in it, and you don't want your faces to lock. And David throughout this psalm is saying, look and taste and experience a goodness and a love that will just decimate your shame, that will lift up your face, that will put light upon you. So, I really thought afterwards I got the question wrong in this sermon. How do you deal with shame? Because the question is how does Jesus deal with your shame? And he dealt with it by becoming shamed himself, by taking on the most humiliation anyone has ever taken on. Not for his own sins, not through a public embarrassment, but through being sinned against as no one ever was, slandered as no one ever was, crucified naked with a crown of thorns, disgraced, dishonored, shamed. And having suffered that for sin, we don't have to. He puts it away. That's why Peter says in 1 Peter 2 verse 6, whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. Whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. That can be true in this world, and it will certainly be true in the world to come. When all shame and all disgrace will be removed, unless you've been ashamed of the Lord yourself. Because Jesus got another promise. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this generation, of him will I be ashamed on that last great day. Let him remove your shame. Especially your shame about him and his words. And you never need to be ashamed again. Let's pray.